What up, everyone? This is Mr. Lord Doc Professor Dark Joker with this week's video. And this week will be an edition of History Behind Fiction, where I basically go over a fictional franchise and go over the history that, inspired it and, what history is like the background for what's going on, if it's like, historical fiction. And so in this week, it will be Assassin's Creed, specifically, the three games where Altair Ibn al-Ad was like the main character, so that'd be the original Assassin's Creed, Altair's Chronicles, and Bloodlines. So I'm going to explain, the actual history behind what went on, in that time period, like what we know, and explain, also about different characters, events, groups, all that. So with all that being said, on with the video. First, I'm going to explain all the actual history behind some of the characters within these Assassin's Creed games. Rashid ad-Din Sinan, aka Al-Mualim. Of course, he was the main antagonist in the original Assassin's Creed game. So he lived from 1135 through September of 1193. And he led the Nizari Ismaili state and the Order of Assassins from 1162 through 1193. Allegedly, he ordered the assassination of the King of Jerusalem, who at the time was Conrad of Montferrat. So, of course, major figure during the Crusades, basically like leading the assassins during basically almost like a 30-year period during it. King Richard the First. So some of his nicknames when he was alive was Richard the Lionheart and Richard Coeur de Lion. So he lived from September 8th, 1157 through April 6th, 1199. And during his younger years, he fought a revolt against his father, Henry II, alongside his brothers, Henry the Young King and Joffrey, or Jeffrey, whatever. But Henry II defeated them. Now, he later did another revolt, but Henry the Young King and Jeffrey were against him this time. And Henry the Young King died, and that made Richard the heir to the throne. Being like, the oldest legitimate son of Henry II. And he eventually defeated a sick Henry II with the help of King Philip II Augustus of France. He was friends with Philip for a long time now. Didn't necessarily stay friends with him. So he reigned as King of England from September 3rd, 1189 through April 6th, 1199. So basically until his death. And there's that he also held the titles of Duke of Normandy, Duke of Aquitaine, Duke of Gascony, Lord of Cyprus, Count of Poitiers, Count of Anjou, Count of Maine, Count of Nantes, and Overlord of Brittany. And he led the Third Crusade against Saladin and Conrad of Montferrat from 1190 through 1192. He was for a time held captive by Leopold of Austria and Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI. And he went to war later against his former friend Philip II. And he was killed by Pierre Basil with the crossbow for the deaths of Pierre's family. So yeah, honestly, this is a major royal figure during the Third Crusade, one of the main leaders of the Catholic side of it. Robert IV de Sable. So he lived from 1150 through September 23rd, 1193. And he fought in the revolt of 1173 through 1174, which was, the revolt of, Richard III. And then Basically, like, and then he was later, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar and the Lord of Cyprus from 1191 through 1193. So, in history, he was the actual Grand Master. So, that's not just in the game. And he fought in the Third Crusade with the Siege of Acre and the Battle of Arsuf being amongst his major victories there in that time. Garnier de Nobles. So he lived from 1147 through August 31st, 1192. So he was the Lord of Gibelin from 1173 through 1175, and he was the Grand Preceptor of the Knights Hospitaller from 1176 through 1177 and 1180 through 1184. So there was like a 3-year period where he wasn't the Grand Preceptor, and he was the Prior of the Lang de, Angleterre from April 10th, 1185 through 1189, and he replaced Armengol de Aspa as the 10th Grand Master of the Knights Hospitaller, and he fought in the Third Crusade with the Battle of Hattin and the Battle of Arsuf being the major battles he fought in. William V of Montferrat. So he lived from 1115 through 1191. He was the seventh Marquis of Montferrat from 1135 through 1191. And he formed various marriage alliances with multiple European dynasties. So, like, basically, a lot of his kids and all that would be married off to different, you know, basically European nobles and royalty. Gave him a lot of influence, a lot of power throughout Europe. And he fought in the Second Crusades, and he was captured by Saladin at the Battle of Hattin in 1187. Now, his death in the original Assassin's Creed game was inspired by the assassination of his son Conrad. So, his son Conrad was actually killed by the assassins, and in real history, and so the death, like for Conrad, was used to inspire William V's death. Now, why they didn't just use Conrad as one of the Templars in the game, I can't answer that question because I don't know. It's like I can't answer that question. So yeah, so of course yeah. So that this was so this William Fifth wasn't necessarily major too much in the Third Crusades. Like he was a little older, so he didn't do a ton. But obviously he was still a respected figure at the time period. Majd Addin. So this character is fictional, but he is loosely based off a historical figure named Baha ad-Din ibn Shaddad, who lived from March 6, 1145 through November 8th, 1234. Now, he was the biographer of Sultan Saladin, and he wrote lots about the Third Crusade, and he witnessed the Siege of Acre and the Battle of Arsuf. Jubair al-Hakim. So another fictional character that's based off historical figure. So Hakim is loosely based on Ibn Jubair, who lived from September 1st, 1145 through November 29th, 1217. And Jubair left Granada to go on a pilgrimage to Mecca, with that trip lasting from 1183 through 1185. And during all his journeys, he was very supportive of Sultan Saladin of Egypt and Syria. And later in his life, he went on 2 other trips across the Middle East from 1189 through 1191 and in 1217. And he wrote about all his travels. So that's how we know a lot about his stuff. A lot of information about Saladin is, mentioned in a lot of his writings. And 1217, during his second, of those later 2 trips, that's when he died. So he died during a journey. You know, kind of it's one hell of a way to go. Traveling around, seeing the world, and he just died. You know, I could see that's probably nice. Died doing what he wanted to do. Can kind of respect that. Master Cybrand. So he lived from 1157 through 1191. He was the first Grand Master of the Teutonic Order, and he held that role from September 1190 through 1191. And he founded the hospital in Autun, and he was a follower of Adolf III of Holstein during the Third Crusade. Armand Bochart. So there's not a lot of information historically about him. All that's known is that he commanded the Templar garrison in Cyprus in 1192. So, the games, that did give him a lot of room, give the developers a lot of room in how to develop his story, which can happen with a lot of this historical fiction in this time period and far back in that, is there's a lot of real life historical figures where there's not a lot known due to record keeping kind of sucking back then in comparison to now. So there's not as much. That's why Middle Ages, like, we don't there's a lot we don't know because there was a lot of stuff that got lost. But yeah, so yeah, basically this is all it's known. He has led a garrison. Now I'm going to go over the different groups that existed in history that these three games use. The Order of Assassins. So this group was founded in 1090 by Hassan al-Saba. It was part of the Nizari Ismailism segment of Ismailis branch of Shia Islam. And, the only members that actually fought, the assassins, which is believed where the term assassination comes from, you know, they're associated with fighting, but not, there was only ones who actually did the fighting were the Fidal. And, daggers, nerf poison, arrows were amongst their weapons of choice when they were killing their targets during the Crusades. They were a major enemy for Saladin, and of course a lot of the Crusaders. The term assassination is believed to inspired by them. Their decline was caused by, the Crusades, all the constant conflict from that. And then you had all the attacks from the Mongols. As that one guy said, we're the exception. The Mongols are the exception. Yeah. So yeah, the Mongols, Crusades, they did a number on them. They eventually collapsed by 1275. The Knights Templar. The full name of the group was the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. Now, in 1119, a French knight named Hugues de Payens proposed the creation of this group to King Baldwin II and Patriarch Warmund of Jerusalem. And after the group was formed, Baldwin gave the Templars a base in the Temple Mount Al Aqsa Mosque. Now, at first, to get money, the Templars relied on donations. So they were basically crowdfunded in a sense, a newer crowdfund being a newer term, but in essence, they were crowdfunded. But they eventually formed a banking system that was able to fund their operations like very efficiently. Like they were good enough to be considered like the first multinational corporation. That is how good the Templars were with money. Now, they weren't independent despite their influence with money. They still answered to the Pope since they were a Catholic military order. All of them answered the Pope. All Catholics answered to the Pope. Now, and the Templars were very good soldiers. They were very good fighters. So they were advanced forces during the Crusades. Now, when a lot of Muslim forces started getting victories during the Crusades and there were various accusations of corruption, the Templars declined, especially when you had the various accusations that King Philip IV made. So in 1307, King Philip IV of France accused the Templars of heresy, idol worship, sodomy, and financial corruption. And the Templars, the ones who were captured, they confessed under duress because they just wanted torture to be done. Basically, they were tortured to give a false confession, and so they confessed to all the false accusations, and basically they were executed. So it's like, okay, you're done being tortured, but now you're dead. You know, that's not much better. Like the death part now, the dying part. Now the aftermath, if you go to heaven, of course that's better. If not, of course it's way worse. Now, and the ones who survived, they just joined different Catholic military orders, so the Templars collapsed. Now, as far as the accusations go, so heresy and idol worship. Now, if you have like a issue with the Catholic Church with some of like their doctrine, like or the existence of the Pope, yes, you would say that they are guilty of heresy and idol worship, which praying to the saints, the belief in Mary being um sinless, even though the Bible clearly states that Jesus is the only one who is sinless, very clear. And the whole like all the stuff they say about Saint Mary, like the Catholics say all the stuff that they're praying to the saints, apocrypha stuff, indulgences, and based on that, Pope infallibility. You could say they're guilty if you uh, are against all those Catholic specific actions. You could say the Templars were guilty of heresy and owl worship, just not the kind that Philip was accused of. They were not guilty of that specific idol worship or heresy. Now, sodomy, well, the Catholic Church does have a history. They do. I I don't think the Templars were involved too much with that. If they were, shame on them, but the specific kind of sodomy that they were accused of, I do not believe they were guilty of that. Now, as far as financial corruption, um, they were a bank. I don't know how corrupt they were. They owe France, I believe, owed money to the Templars, and that's believed to be a motivation behind the accusations that it was to get out of debt. I mean, you can't pay someone money if they're dead. That's the basic. Makes sense as a motive. It's despicable, but that's what I mean that and I think that was the motivation. Now, if I and I don't know if the Templars were involved with indulgences. 'Cause I don't know how long indulgences were a thing in the Catholic Church. If they were involved with that, then yes, they are guilty of financial corruption, but that's not what they were. That the indulgences were not what they were accused of being involved with. That was not part of the accusations. So I can't say they're guilty of that. So basically, Philip IV was making a bunch of false accusations. And whether your opinions with the Catholic Church or the Templars, the accusations were false. And, obviously they sinned just like every other man, because all have sinned to fall short of the glory of God. But what they were accused of was false accusations, and the Templars did not deserve to be executed for that stuff because they were innocent of those specific accusations. The Knights Hospitaller. So, the full name of this group is the Order of Knights of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem. So, the Hospital of St. John started in Jerusalem in the early 1100s. I don't know the exact year. Now, and the group was recognized by Pope Pascal II in 1113. This was one of the major military orders that the Catholic Church had during the Crusades. Now, it became divided during the Protestant Reformation because some of the members, you had like a Protestant version of the Knights Hospitaller, that existed. They consider themselves members, but but they were Protestant. They were separate from the Catholic Church, so they might have been the better version of the group. And and they went to war with Emperor Napoleon I Bonaparte of France in 1798. where they lost there in about 1798, they lost their stronghold in Malta, and that led to the order to disperse across Europe, and kind of divide up and decline, and the order actually technically still exists today, but as like successor orders such as the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, which formed in 1834, the Protestant Orders of St. John, which is kind of like the Protestant version. That one first formed in 1852 as like kind of like an official group. Then the Most Venerable Order of St. John formed in 1888. So this is one of the military orders that still exists. While it's not necessarily, don't know if they necessarily operate as like military orders because you don't necessarily have papal armies these days. You don't necessarily have that too much. Like to my knowledge, like I don't think you'll see the Vatican ordering soldiers around. But, some of these groups still exist, but they're not really prominent. With the Knights Hospitaller being one, the ones that still exist. The Teutonic Order. So the full name of this group is the Order of Brothers of the German House of St. Mary in Jerusalem. So this group was founded in 1190, and it ran a German hospital in Jerusalem. Now, of course, this time period, Germany wasn't necessarily we didn't necessarily call it, it was the Holy Roman Empire, but and then it became a military order in 1198. Of course, under the control of the Catholic Church. It conquered different territories in Europe during the Crusades, and it declined due to various attacks from Lithuania and Poland. Despite all that, it still exists today. Now I'm going to go over some of the historical events that occurred in these games. So the backdrop for these three Assassin's Creed games is the Third Crusade. So King Philip II of France, King Richard I of England, and Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa invaded the Holy Land, basically, which that would refer to like current day Israel and all that, and some of the surrounding areas. Basically, they invaded that area on May 11th, 1189, and they fought the Byzantine Empire and Saladin. So you had various enemies going on. I don't know if you could necessarily call it like one on one, like one side versus one side. You had different factions going on because I'm not gonna claim to be an expert on everything about the Crusades. There's a lot of complicated stuff that went down then. But yeah, so some of the famous battles, you had the Siege of Acre from 1189 through 1191, Battle of Arsuf in 1191, and the Battle of Jaffa in 1192, which that was the last battle because the Treaty of Jaffa in September 2nd, 1192 is what officially ended the war. So basically, like, while the Crusaders got some victories, overall, like the Muslim forces, well, won. I guess it was a net victory for the Muslims, and so which is partly why the assassins are portrayed as protagonists in these games is that they want to I imagine they want to show the good guys losing like in this like they was like, oh, you play as the assassins, wait, they lost. Like, if let's say if hypothetically the Templars had won in history, they probably would have done the Templars as the protagonists, just because generally you play as the side that wins in a lot of games. Heck, in Assassin's Creed, you're basically playing the victor every game. Like, I mean, like whichever side you're playing on, you're basically that side's gonna win. You know. So yeah, this is basically just all the major conflict in this time period. So the major figures during this war. And that's it. Did y'all like this video? Did you like some of the history regarding these three Assassin's Creed games? Was there anything I forgot? You can put all that in the comments. I plan to do one ones for the other Assassin's Creed games as well in the future. Like I didn't necessarily want to do one for each game. Like for one for all for I didn't want to do one for the entire series because like that would take way too long. That'd be an extremely long video. And with so many other Assassin's Creed games still being made, I thought, let's divide up to the ones that are for different time periods. So like these Altair games put as one, the Ezio games will at least two, and Brotherhood will be one. Revelations probably should be by itself. But yeah, I plan to do other videos like this for like the other Assassin's Creed games. So do you like this? Do you have other fictional stories that you want me to do history behind fiction for? Put all that in the comments and like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. And look forward to the next video.